Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a public hearing on a resolution to repeal and replace Resolution Number 161570 with respect to the White Flint Sector Plan Implementation Strategy and Infrastructure Improvement List and related amendments to the FY 21 to 26 Capital Improvements Program. A joint GO-E&E Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for March 16th. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on March 10th. Ms. Kennedy, could you please call the speakers for this public hearing?
Yes, our first speaker for this public hearing is Mary Beck. Ms. Beck, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Beck, the Capital Budget Manager with OMB, and I'm here testifying today on behalf of the County Executive. The County Executive has sent a White Flint redevelopment funding plan and CIP amendments to the Council that are designed to achieve several goals. First, to meet our legal requirements to establish a repayment plan for $30 million in general fund advances, to advance $15 million in general obligation bond premium to continue funding construction in White Flint, and to avoid, to minimize near-term district repayments, to use district debt to cover project costs beyond the $45 million. This will also create a longer repayment period for the property owners, to avoid negatively impacting the general fund reserves, which is important for our overall capital program financing, and to lift the prior resolution's tax cap. That cap was inconsistent with the law's intent to have the district support the full cost of the improvements, and lifting the cap will help us get the cheapest rate on debt for the district. The County Executive asked that the Council act quickly, since this will also help minimize early term tax rate increases. A tax increase should not be needed until FY24, according to a conservative analysis of the plan. And at that time, on a $1 million property, taxes would be $617 higher than the current rate. Even with these increases, property taxes would be lower than the upfront impact taxes and other transportation improvements developers pay in other parts of the county. We will be continuing to work with property owners to try to minimize and delay tax increases as much as possible, particularly by helping to grow the tax base. And with that in mind, we will keep conversations and an open mind in terms of how some of the details can be structured. And we are available to help brief privately council members if they are interested in that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, that is all we have for this public hearing.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Ms. Beck. This public hearing is now closed. The next public hearing, item 6, is a public hearing on a resolution to approve a supplemental appropriation to the FY21 operating budget, Montgomery County. This is a public hearing on FY21 National Pollution Discharge and Elimination System Municipal Separate Stormwater System Permit Financial Assurance Plan. A T&E Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for March 22nd. Persons wishing to submit additional material for our consideration should do so before the close of business on March 16th. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
We do. We have one speaker, Kenneth Bauer. Mr. Bauer, you have 2 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Yes, good afternoon, Council President Hucker and council members. My name is Kenneth Bauer. I am president of the West Montgomery County Citizens Association, but I am representing myself today. I only want to talk about 2 numbers in the FAP. One number is $17.4 million. That is the amount of money that has already been wasted on so-called stream restorations that have been completed. The other number is $21.5 million. That is the amount of money for stream restorations under construction or proposed. This will also be a terrible misuse of taxpayer money. The inconvenient truth is that these mismanaged projects convert our natural stream valleys into engineered stormwater conveyances that only temporarily stop erosion without addressing the root cause of the problem, which is stormwater fire hosing into streams from impervious surfaces like roads. These stream restorations have destroyed 30,000 linear feet of natural streams, thousands of trees, and dozens of acres of forest. Please see the pictures in my written testimony. And don't be fooled, no amount of post-construction planting can reconstitute a destroyed natural forest community. To add insult to injury, the county asked that stream restorations be exempted from our forest conservation laws. Furthermore, the destruction of forests by stream restorations directly contradicts the draft Climate Action Plan, which has the goal of protecting existing forests, not destroying them. Plus, the new RFP for MS4 permit projects would continue to allow up to 50% of credit to come from destructive stream restorations. Research and the county's own results show that as far as the whole environment, stream restorations just don't work. The good news is that we already know alternatives to stream restorations that do work. Just look at the county websites for the Green Streets and Rainscapes programs. The council needs to pass legislation to prohibit these so-called stream restorations. I suggest it be called the Prevent Stream Ecocide Bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, that's all we have for this hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. This public hearing is now closed. And the next item is a public hearing on a resolution to approve a supplemental appropriation to the FY21 operating budget, Montgomery County Government non-departmental account compensation and employee benefits adjustment in the amount of $3,752,889. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, could you introduce the speakers for this hearing, please?
Yes, our first speaker will be Richard Madalino. Mr. Madalino, you have 2 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and members of the council. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the county executive to let you know how much he appreciates your willingness to take this up in a quick fashion, to ask for your support for this important resolution and supplemental appropriation in order to provide our employees, for some of them, their first general wage adjustment in more than 2 years, for many of our employees for the last 18 months. And to remind you that the actions you take, should you hopefully pass this supplemental appropriation today, will be reflected in the budget that you see before you on Monday. It is affordable, and it is something that I'm sure you would agree our employees who have worked long and hard during the pandemic to keep up all of the services to the county and go above and beyond, often risking their lives in order to keep our important services going, are recognized for their efforts and are given this small degree of support in order to make sure their families and themselves have the support they need to afford both inflation and the cost of living in our community. So with that, Mr. President, council members, we respectfully ask for your support for this supplemental appropriations. And I'll be around to answer questions as you move forward to working on this appropriation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madalino. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Buttle. Mr. Buttle, you may begin when you're ready. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and respective council members. My name is Jeffrey Buttle. I am president of IFF Local 1664. We represent approximately 1,200 career firefighters and paramedics here in Montgomery County, Maryland. The same members who have been on the front lines during this very difficult pandemic, providing a critical service to the citizens of Montgomery County. If anything, certainly our jobs on a day-to-day basis have become more complex due to the public health concerns with the pandemic. Our members last received a general wage adjustment in November of 2019, and members have not received a step increase since July of 2020. To give a little context of who's eligible for some of these various provisions, 809 members are eligible for the fiscal year 21 step. However, 348 of those are still missing their FY13 service increment, which has certainly had an impact on them. With the longevity steps, 47 of our members are eligible for the longevity step 1. And we currently have 0 members that would receive a longevity step 2 in FY21. So we are here to testify in favor of the supplemental appropriation and appreciate the council's support on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buttle.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gino Wren. Mr. Wren, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, President Hucker and members of the council. I'm here today in support of the agreement reached between the county executive and the UFCW Local 1995 McGeo I've submitted written testimony along with accompanying tables. I would urge you all to study those that data found on the tables. I have always been proud of our membership, however, been never more proud than I am during the COVID-19 pandemic. Worldwide essential employees have sustained us through this unprecedented public health disaster. A substantial number of McGeo members are frontline essential employees, deputy sheriffs, corrections, HHS, social workers, therapists, ride-on drivers, who were all charged and did on a daily basis maintain the public health and safety of our community. Liquor employees as well were on the front line helping generate much needed revenues for the county's operating budget. McGeo members, like most essential workers everywhere, work in jobs that are not highly compensated. Like most essential workers everywhere, McGeo's membership is majority female/minority. Many are frontline essential workers who could not work from home like other public and private sector employees, exposing themselves to serious risks. Several of our members and many of their loved ones paid the ultimate price. These tragic losses continue to haunt our entire union family, as well as the communities they were all part of. Fortunately, most of our McGeo members remain healthy, vigilant, and eager to continue to serve. All McGeo members, however, have paid a steep economic price. Once again, an uncertain economy has resulted in canceled GWAs in increments, which has significantly damaged our membership career earnings. GWAs have been denied or canceled in 4 of the past 10 years. GWAs are necessary to maintain and offset the increases in the cost of consumer goods. The Consumer Price Index for the Washington, D.C. area has increased by over 16% over the past 10 years. McGeo GWA adjustments have increased only 4%, leaving our membership 2.29% behind in purchasing power.
Pardon me, Mr. Wren, I'm so sorry, but your time is up. Sorry
Wow.
for the interruption. Thank you for your
That
testimony.
goes fast. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I'll answer them.
Our next speaker is Michael McCullough. Mr. McCullough, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Okay, I'm here. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Michael McCullough, and I'm an officer at the Montgomery County for Montgomery County Corrections. Over the last year, because of COVID, our work life has changed dramatically. Not only do we have to pick up extra hours, but the way we do our day-to-day jobs have changed as well. Because we have a lot of coworkers that had pre-existing conditions, so a lot of them no longer can come to work. So we had to pick up a lot of extra hours just to keep our facilities running. We have to wear double mask, and I don't know if you guys know what it's like to work in a jail, but to work in a jail for 8 hours wearing a double mask is tasking, especially if you get drafted and have to work 16 hours in a double mask. The culture has changed dramatically when it comes to dealing with inmates and officers. A lot of our inmates have mental health issues, and they do not grasp wearing a mask all day. So it's times where they rip them off. We have to really convince them to put them back on. We can't. We have to restrain them. There's no policies behind this. And then we have the inmates that actually test positive that are on quarantine status. We still have to deal with them as well. We're doing our best to handle this, but we missed other things. Like, I'm an avid coffee drinker. I cannot have a cup of coffee at work. If so, I have to find a closet or empty room just to sip a cup of coffee or have a drop of water on a day-to-day basis. We deserve the general wage adjustment and the other increases last year before the pandemic. We definitely deserve them now. And I urge you guys to pass this. We would appreciate it because it's really tough in corrections right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. McCullough. Our next speaker is Nancy Austin. Ms. Austin, you may begin. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, President Hucker and members of the County Council. My name is Nancy Austin, and I am a school community health nurse in Montgomery County Schools. I was at the schools until COVID-19 turned us on our heads. School community health nurses and school health room technicians are employees of the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. Before COVID-19, we had an incredibly difficult time recruiting and retaining school nurses. Private sector nurses make a lot more money, but it isn't just the money, it's the workload. Historically, we have too few nurses and we're asked to do more with less. Inevitable burnout ensues and our nurses leave us for the private sector. We had a recruitment and retention problem before COVID, and unfortunately, COVID has exacerbated the problem. The pandemic has forced us into a complete transformation. What was our jobs, caring for school children, went away a year ago. Instead, we were redeployed to shelters, jails, COVID testing, vaccine distribution, call center, and contact tracing. We work days, evenings, overnight rotations, and weekends instead of Monday through Friday in our schools. When the world stopped, we didn't complain and we didn't argue. We stepped forward and did it because that is what public sector healthcare workers do. We have been front-facing 7 days a week for a year. Now we're going back to our schools, and they look nothing like they did before COVID. We'll still care for children who are medically fragile, diabetics, asthmatics, but we will also have this lurking shadow of COVID. As nurses, though, we cannot stay hidden. We'll be needed to be available to take care of the children because you can't administer care behind a plexiglass screen. We don't just need our general wage adjustment and our other collectively bargained increases, we deserve them. We can't help if there's a pandemic, but we've kept this county running despite all the problems that the pandemic caused. We really don't need your thanks. We really need your action. We need to be compensated fairly. I urge you to pass this increase. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Austin. Our next speaker is Lisa Titus. Ms. Titus, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time. My name is Lisa Titus. I'm a deputy sheriff with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and a shop steward with UFCW Local 1994 McGeo. Since the beginning of the pandemic, my workload and the workload of my coworkers has skyrocketed. In my section alone, the domestic violence section, our workload has probably doubled, if not tripled, since the beginning of this pandemic. We've been out there, front lines, on the streets, dealing with the public the entire time. We didn't have the luxury of staying home and remaining socially distant. There's been too much going on. Personally, I've had to go into houses with known confirmed COVID positive individuals to take them to the hospital to receive services and evaluations that they desperately need. Once at the hospital, I'm there where I have an increased risk of COVID exposure. Many of the people that we deal with are suffering from mental health crises, and they don't grasp the concept of needing PPE. That layer of protection that so many people are afforded, many use themselves to keep themselves protected, is stripped away from us. My coworkers and I, we serve warrants, we provide court security, we also assist in working in and out of the jails, transporting inmates to doctor's appointments and other appearances that are mandatory for them. We provide child support enforcement and help with domestic violence intervention. The biggest problem since the pandemic has hit has been related to mental health. Everyone's issues and their responses to us have been heightened. There are folks who are trying to get around the law and have found loopholes. We used to be in charge of evictions, but since those have been on hold, people are finding ways around getting individuals out of their house, and we are the individuals who have to enforce that. It's tough and it's frustrating. Our job was dangerous before. It's more dangerous now during the pandemic, but the intensity levels have gone through the roof, adding an additional layer of danger to our jobs. I urge you to approve our general wage adjustment and other increases. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Titus. Mr. President, that wraps up the speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you to all our speakers. Ms. Austin, it's nice to see you in person. Thank you for being the one that answered the phone when I had to call the Dennis Avenue Health Center when my kids got COVID. Thank you for your help and that of all of our frontline workers. Okay, council, this hearing is now closed. Council Member Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. This morning we commemorated the 1 year since here in Montgomery County we realized and we're faced with the very sobering news that COVID was very much present in our county and we had to take swift action. And that meant that our entire government had to retool and quickly adapt to a very scary environment. And as I've said before, with no manual to guide us through something like this. And it is obvious that our employees, as you've heard some of the stories, but there are so many more, have been front and center in also retooling, adapting, realigning their services and everything that they provide to support our residents. We also know that there have been countless and countless people in our community that have done the same. And I think that this symbiotic effort, it's exactly what has helped us get to the point where we are today, where we're hopeful. We're not there yet, but we are hopeful. And this is never an easy situation because, for us, it's never binary. It's never either or. We're juggling a lot of different things, specifically, monitoring very carefully our fiscal situation so that we can continue to provide the support that the residents need, but also continue to make sure that we have appropriate funding in order to have an appropriate staff complement at all levels. But I think that we have reached a point where, there have been some frank conversations in a collaborative fashion about how to move forward, how to provide some compensation adjustment to our employees who have had, again, to face extraordinary challenges and have done it with courage and with grace. And so I am pleased that we are here, that we have reached this type of understanding and will continue to do. I think we all are committed to continuing to do everything possible to work towards, a healthy fiscal situation so we can, again, not only just respond to our residents, but also continue to support our staff who are the ones delivering that support. So I just want to thank everybody who came to the table, who had conversations, but most importantly, and I know this, Ms. Austin says she doesn't want thank yous, but I am going to say thank you and gracias because this is God's work. This is obviously not the type of work that people get into because they want to become wealthy. This is the type of work that you do because you are moved by the spirit of public service. So thank you, and I look forward to taking this vote.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. We can fulfill our legal obligation to approve structurally balanced budgets by funding ongoing obligations from reserves. That's why we have established fiscal policies that restrict the use of reserves in order to ensure the county's long-term fiscal sustainability. At a time of deep fiscal and economic uncertainty, the county executive's proposal that's before us uses the current year's reserves, which are already below our 10% policy target, to fund nearly $33 million in costs over the next 15 months and approximately $29 million in ongoing annual obligations. Because this supplemental appropriation isn't fiscally sustainable and doesn't follow our established fiscal policies, I must respectfully vote no. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, I was remiss. I should ask first for a resolution before we have a motion in favor of the resolution.
So moved.
Councilmember Navarro moves and Councilmember Katz seconds. Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Well, this has been a tough issue, and we've been wrangling over this for a really long time. So if nothing else, I'll be pleased that we can put it behind us and focus on the next difficult decision ahead of us. I want to make some comments, and then I'm going to make a motion. our job is to focus on what we can afford. And we know that the work that our employees do is valuable. And we know that this has been an extraordinary difficult year. We know that our county residents have faced an incredibly difficult year. When we passed the budget last year, we were in a moment of unprecedented uncertainty about what the future would be. And there were days when I thought we were heading into the next Great Depression, and there were days when it seemed like maybe things would be okay. I would say that fiscally, economically, the impact on the county, both locally and with the benefit of state and federal help, has been far less damaging than we would have ever hoped. And so when we made the decision last spring, which I think was wise, to postpone any consideration of compensation increases, we would be here today regardless to consider whether that was still needed. So I want to say, first of all, just overall on the question of, would it be appropriate to return to compensation increases, STEP and or GWA? Yes, it is appropriate to return to that conversation, just based narrowly on the question of, we didn't know how much money we had last year, we were going to have, and we said we would come back to it mid-year. The elephant in the room, of course, is the $89 million that has already gone out the door in hazard pay. And I don't know how to disentangle these issues. Without the hazard pay, there's no question this is affordable. If we hadn't had the hazard pay continuing week after week, month after month, there's no doubt this package that we have today before us is the right package to do. But we can't just assume that didn't happen or sort of pretend like it didn't happen. So that's the first kind of challenge for me. I also recognize that, for example, step increases matter a lot to the workforce, and I think that to the extent that we can provide any increases, step increases should be the first priority. They're very hard to come back to. We generally don't come back to them. Occasionally we do in small pieces. But the fact that week after week we had money going out the door for the differential pay it's just there is a reckoning that's coming on that problem, and it's going to show up in a lot of different ways over time. But it has been enormously frustrating. Week after week, the executive branch gave us a highly misleading statement that they were working on it, they were renegotiating it, and in the interim, every other peer jurisdiction had phased it out. Park and Planning, our own agency, had phased it out. MCPS had never provided it. Week after week, we kept that money going out the door, and the end result, $89 million having gone to differential pay, vastly exceeds what we spend on small business relief, rental assistance, contact tracing, testing. Our reserves have taken a big hit, and $89 million has gone out the door. I don't think that this is consistent with the spirit or the intent of the federal disaster relief funding. And I know that we have heard different characterizations of the likelihood of getting FEMA reimbursement. We were assured it would come. It has never, certainly nothing like what we were assured has materialized, and we don't know to what extent it will. So I am still concerned that we are in a difficult budget situation, and in such a situation, it is imprudent to layer more and more on top. And so in light of the $89 million that we have spent already on differential, and I think I've made my position clear, I would like to move, and I will move, that we not include the GWA portion. I think that having the step increase is reasonable, all things considered. It's the price that we have to pay, apparently, unfortunately, to get the executive branch to shut down the differential. And I think it is an acceptable compromise between our branches of government. So I move that we not fund the GWA portion of this appropriation.
I second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion of that?
Mr. President.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I really want to thank union partners for a great conversation that we were able to have a little over a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and discuss this. And I came from a place in which I was very adamant about the fact that so many in our community hadn't seen the wage increase. So many in our community had lost their jobs. So many had struggled. So many are coupled with the very same challenges that we hear some of the folks who testified today. When I think about my wife who wears a double mask every day and has people in her face, 1 feet, 1.5 feet away constantly, who's on her feet for 8 hours a day, who's a Black woman trying to struggle to keep her business afloat. I understand where our community is. I understand the challenges that folks are facing in our industry. I see it every day when she comes home and she's exhausted. I see it. I understand. But at the same time, I also understand all of those grocery store workers, those school care workers who are out there passing out lunches, all of the folks out there who still haven't recognized the fact that folks are giving them a little bit extra. In fact, they're getting less. And so from that perspective, it's incredibly important for us to understand that and how much more we're going to need to have to do to help stand them up. Those are folks in our community who still will need a helping hand as well. So it's not saying that our county employees don't need something. They do. And I fully support moving forward with the 3.5%. That step is incredibly important and recognizes the great work and sacrifice that they have made. But at the same time, I feel as though we also have to be fiscally prudent in terms of understanding that we're going to have so much that we need to do. We have a school system that is going to have to answer the call to at least 60, if not 70,000 returning students, possibly more. We have education equity hubs that need to be stood up in separate places outside of our schools, which is going to require more money. We have teachers who are now going to be on the front lines, just like all of our other employees. And as we saw at Damascus Middle School, who will be at risk for contracting COVID, just like all of our other employees. So the reality is this, is that I think for us, we need to be measured in terms of our approach. I let our union partners know that I did support a compromise. This is my idea of compromise. This is where I think we do our part in recognizing the great work that they have done, but also ensure that we have additional resources to help stand up these other entities that will be so important in our community. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President Albornoz.
Okay. I know everybody's exhausted. I know this has been an extraordinary year. It's hard to process everything everyone has gone through. Everyone agrees that our public employees have really done heroic work over this last year. Everyone agrees that our county residents have taken it on the chin disproportionately among our minority communities in particular. And this is not an either or. And I believe what is before us is a compromise. There have been many discussions over the last several weeks regarding this particular compensation package. Absolutely an acknowledgement that the differential pay, which a little more than half of our county employees received, was not received by the other half. And yet the work has been overwhelming across every single county agency. And every single county employee, well, I shouldn't say that. Many, if not most county employees have been asked to take up the charge, and in instances, as you all know, I was the former director of the Recreation Department. Recreation employees have helped with voting. Recreation employees have helped with vaccination sites. They've helped with homeless shelters. They have helped distribute food to senior citizens. And of course, our first responders have continued to also perform heroic work. I think all of us agree with that. I know all of us agree with that. And so I understand the concerns about fiscal responsibility. I've been on the record since joining this body on my strong passion and interest in ensuring that we have fiscal responsibility, but it is also equally passionate that I ensure that that our county employees receive the level of support that they need to put them in the best possible position to continue to provide support for the unprecedented needs that have come before us by our county residents. And so I do think this moves us forward. This will not be the last contract. There will be more moving forward. We, of course, the good news is, are not in the fiscal situation. Our worst fears have not come true with regards to what was possible. And thanks to a lot of support from our federal delegation and our new president, we have an additional amount of resources that will be coming to bear that will immediately go towards assisting those residents that are the most in need. I respect very much where my colleagues are coming from and expressing their concern, and I believe it is entirely authentic and understandable to be concerned about the county's fiscal situation. But where I've landed on this, weighing all sides, is that we must move forward, and this is a way for us to move forward. It discontinues the differential pay, and it moves us forward. So I will support what is before us. I will not support this motion, but I appreciate where everyone's coming on this and believe that there is a lot of work that will need to be done in the coming months and frankly years as we fully recover from what has transpired over this past year. And we must do it together and as collegially as possible. It's important for our public to understand that we are united in supporting them in every way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank all of our employees before I speak to the motion, those that testified, those that didn't, that have been stepping up in service to our residents. No, it's not easy. I think the three that came before us today were but a snapshot of how challenging and hard and difficult it's been for all of our residents, but particularly those who are charged with serving and maintaining the health and welfare of all of our residents. So thank you. I won't be supporting this motion. I want to point out a couple things that were used in saying why it's necessary. The FEMA and CRF funds were used for the hazard pay, primarily, not our general reserves. Okay? And that's what we're seeking reimbursement for. We'll see how much we get. In the American Rescue Act that's before the Congress will be voted on tomorrow, supported by all of us and all of our congressional delegation, it calls for a $13 an hour hazard pay for frontline workers. Back pay. It calls for that in that bill. So the idea that we aren't spending this money to do that is just wrong, or that we shouldn't do it is just wrong. Now, should other people be paid? Grocery workers, some of them got $1, some of them got 50 cents. Should private sector workers have been paid hazard pay and should have a wage increase? Absolutely. Should have the $15 minimum wage, should that be included in what is going forward? Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's not. But we should be a model actor. We should do what is right. And that's why I think this agreement and this proposal to pay the GWA and to pay the steps is the right thing to do. These are for our represented folks who make the least amount in these agencies that are providing services to our residents. I've mentioned this many times before. A step, when I worked in the federal government, that was something that happened automatically. It was part of when you say you're going to serve the public, they should happen. So we should do those. Obviously, we have to be cognizant of our fiscal situation. It has not been as bad as we thought. The federal government We have our second package or third package coming, and that's good. And receipts have been decent as far as folks who have been paying their taxes. And that's because this has been a very unequal pandemic, as we all know. One of the little things that was tucked into the first CARES Act, thanks to Donald Trump, were tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires that Biden's folks are scrambling to try to claw back, but they're not going to be able to. So just another example of the inequity that we've seen in this recovery and in this pandemic. So we should be the model and do the right thing. And this is absolutely affordable. It's affordable this year, and then we'll have a conversation and go forward next year. But this is absolutely affordable. Don't let anyone tell you this isn't affordable. It's not only affordable, it's the right thing to do. And I'll be voting against this motion. I'll be supporting the underlying bill or the underlying appropriation because we should do it for our employees. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we spent a lot of time today talking about the year anniversary that we're in when the coronavirus came to our community and changed our lives forever. And when this plague struck us, everybody was frightened and concerned for their health. Yet the daily services that our residents depend on needed to be carried out. From public health to public safety, work needed to be done because our constituents depended on it. And to compensate our hardworking and essential employees who also were frightened and concerned for their own health, a unanimous council, every single one of us, agreed to provide COVID pay, and governments across the country did the same thing. And it was a gesture to express the appreciation that we have for our hardworking employees. And now, 1 year later, no one would expect or would have expected us to be in this position that we're in. You know, 525,000 Americans have been killed by COVID, and here in Montgomery County, 1,426 residents have died, including of a number of our hardworking employees. And so when we also look at what that year has entailed, it was this COVID pay. That was $3.8 million per pay period, totaling more than $89 million over the year. And that was unsustainable. I think we're all in agreement about that fiscal reality, that the COVID pay as designed over this period of time was unsustainable. And so the question is, how do we mitigate it? We couldn't unilaterally stop it because of the existing contract. As I understand it to be, if we had tried to unilaterally stop COVID pay, I suppose there would be a lawsuit and we'd probably lose because we'd be breaking an existing contract. And so if we didn't want to continue the $3.8 million in COVID pay per pay period, which we can't afford, then we needed to come to some other solution. And that's what this original proposal does. It is a compromise, recognizing the constraints that were originally upon us and what we need to do to get out of it. And recognizing that we can't continue paying the COVID pay as it is in the contract, we need to find another solution. And I believe that this proposal, the original unamended proposal that is before us, is a compromise that will do just that. And that's the reason I'll be supporting the original unamended proposal.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too will be voting for the original motion. I proudly seconded it, and I will not vote for the secondary motion. Last year, when we did the continuity of services budget, the year that that I had the true pleasure of being the council president, no one wanted to do the budget the way that we ended up having to do the budget. We were involved in a crisis. We still are, but we were involved in a crisis that no one knew when it would end. No one knew how it would end, but we knew that we were in a crisis. And when you're in a crisis, you take as cautious of steps as you can possibly take. And that's what we did. We have the best employees in the world, frontline every other type of employee. They risk their lives in many cases for an extra $10 an hour, which I don't know of, and others have done that in the private sector as well for no additional fee. But in many cases, the people who risk their lives on the county employment were people that actually rushed in to a situation to save someone's life that had no one else available to help them save their life. And we did it. Our employees did it. And for us to now say, and you know, our budgetary process was a difficult one, but the bottom line is, and literally it's the bottom line, is as bad as we thought it could be, it was not nearly as bad as it is ending up. And so there in itself it's time to say we need to correct what we did. We need to look forward to doing something different. And I believe the first motion is the way to go forward with this. And I will be voting for that and not for the secondary. Thank you very much. And thank you to our employees.
Thank you, Council Member. I don't see any other requests to speak. I don't want to repeat what's been said, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say how grateful I am to all our frontline workers. They have been through a lot, and it's really appropriate that we're talking about this 1 year after the public health emergency and after this morning's presentation, when they weren't as central of a part of it as many of our nonprofit and other partners. Whether they've been spending this year putting vaccines in arms or driving buses and bringing essential workers to our hospitals or our grocery stores, whether they've been providing mental health services, or whether they're EMS and firefighters running COVID patients to the hospital night after night after night, I think we need to recognize their service. And words aren't enough. That includes adequate compensation. For so many of our first responders in particular, they're at a wage differential. We're paying them less than they would at many surrounding jurisdictions. And that's one reason we have a huge problem with employee retention, particularly among our first responders. And that costs us all a lot of money. It costs a lot to recruit and train new staff, and it costs us a lot when we have gaps in our service provision, especially among our first responders. I think this is a modest step to recognize their work and maintain the quality services that our residents expect. I am grateful that they're willing to continue doing that work on the front lines at risk to themselves without continued hazard pay. Many of them have gotten sick, and several have died, and many have been hospitalized. And we haven't talked about that a whole lot, but that's the risk that they put themselves at to perform public service and perform vital services our residents count on every single year, every single day. So I'll be supporting the original resolution. I think it's prudent. I think it's targeted. I think it's measured, and it's certainly affordable. And clearly, to me, it's the right thing to do. So if there are no other comments, can we, all those in favor of the secondary motion supported by Councilmember Reamer and seconded by Councilmember Rice, please raise your hand. That is Councilmember Reamer and Councilmember Rice. All those opposed to that, please raise your hand. Council Vice President Albornoz, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Jawando. So that secondary motion fails. The primary, the original motion is on the table, introduced by Councilmember Navarro and seconded by Councilmember Katz. All those in favor of supporting this resolution?
Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
I actually sent you a message. I'd like to speak, please.
Oh, yep, just direct. Thank you. Go ahead.
So while I would have preferred for us to be in a situation where we had more manageable fiscal responsibility, I am going to support this motion. I firmly believe that it is important for us to make sure that we're doing what we need to help support our employees. I just ask my colleagues, when it comes time for us to recognize the same sacrifice that's being made for many folks in our community, for many other entities, including Montgomery College and MCPS, that we come at this with the same level of fervor and support, because they too will need to be recognized and supported for the sacrifice that they're making. And so, again, since it has been asserted that we are fiscally in a good place, I look forward to seeing that additional revenue flow to these entities to help stand them up so that they can continue the great work that we know that all of our other county employees are doing as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Yes, and of course it's in the county employees contract. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I'll also be supporting the underlying motion or the appropriation that we have. I think it would have been better if we had amended it, but at the same time, it was also our only option to shut down the long-running and frankly excessive hazard pay. I want to be clear, I have supported hazard pay. I just think it needed to be an appropriate and affordable amount, which is not what we had. But in any event, I think this is an acceptable way. Could have been, anyway, so I will be supporting the underlying motion, and thanks for the deliberation.
All those in favor of the underlying motion, please raise your hand. That's Councilmember Vice President Albornoz, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Cass, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Juando, and Council President. And all those opposed? Councilmember Friedson. Okay, motion passes. Thank you all for the deliberation. Next, colleagues, is a public hearing on Bill 521, Agricultural Land Preservation Solar Collection System, Dedication of Business Personal Property Tax Revenue. This bill would dedicate personal property tax revenue received for certain solar collection systems for the Agricultural Land Preservation Fund, increase the land in the county preserved for agricultural uses, and generally amend the law governing the preservation of land for agricultural uses. A Fed committee work session will be scheduled at a later date. Persons wishing to submit additional material should do so before the close of business, March 16th. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
We do have speakers. Our first speaker for this public hearing is Doug Bauscher. Mr. Bauscher, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Members of the council, the situation concerning this bill has changed drastically since January. Then it was expected that ZTA 2001 would result in 1,800 acres of community solar in the Ag Reserve, generating about $3.5 million in tax revenue over 10 years. However, before you passed the ZTA, you made it illegal for any solar project to include even 1 square inch of Class 2 soil, the most widespread soil type in the county. This amendment has made it impossible to reach more than a small fraction of the 1,800 acres, as shown by 3 different analyses detailed in my testimony. They show that you're now talking about having an average of just $30,000 a year, even under the most optimistic assumptions. Now, I realize that some members of the council have expressed the hope that we will have a lot more solar projects than that. But as has often been said, hope is not a policy, and hope will not change the soil map. So now that you have only a small amount of money, putting all of it into agricultural preservation is a bad choice. Preservation is expensive. You would only be able to preserve about 7 acres a year. Furthermore, preservation benefits the biggest landowners, who are the small minority of farmers. Those who have the most land get the most from payments to preserve it. Most importantly, it's racially discriminatory because the 4% of county residents who live in the Ag Reserve are both whiter and wealthier than the rest of the county, and there is great racial inequity in farmland ownership. Black residents make up 18% of the county's population, but only 12% of the population of the Ag Reserve. They are only 4% of the county's farmers and have only 1% of farmland. Latinx residents make up 20% of the county's population, but only 10% of the population of the Ag Reserve. They're only 5% of the county's farmers and have only 2% of the farmland. So I urge you instead to use this revenue to take a small step towards racial equity by funding a program to help young Black and Latinx county residents get started in farming. It cannot be a large program. You don't have the money for that, but it can be a start toward racial justice in Montgomery County agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Michael Jamison. Mr. Jamison, you may begin when you're ready. You have 2 minutes for your testimony.
Okay. Good afternoon. I am Michael Jamison from Jamison Ag and Turf in Poolesville. I'm here to testify as a farmer and chair of the Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board in support of Bill 521. A sustainable source of funding for our ag preservation program continue to be a biggest challenge for our agricultural reserve. All the while, landowner interest in ag land preservation continues to outpace the level of adequate funding for agricultural easement acquisitions. This Bill 521 will create a mechanism for the solar industry in conjunction with Solar ZTA 20-01 to provide private sector investments for ag land programs. This outcome would benefit both the county government, the environment, and the farmers that enroll into our preservation programs. What an amazing success story for the farmers in the county to have an agricultural industry that is alive and well while being encompassed by such a robust metropolitan presence around us. Through preservation, this county has been a place that has allowed for all levels of agriculture to introduce, build, and sustain. Take, for example, the alcohol production facilities and the CSAs that have recently emerged and seem to be flourishing quite well. We are a county whose food produced here touches not only the mouths of local residents through farmers markets, but also being exported to reach the hands of those as far as Southeast Asia, benefiting all humankind, locally and globally. Through having an effective land preservation program, our farmers have put enormous faith into investing towards cutting-edge trends and technology being used in agriculture today. These trends, whether best management practices or using innovative technologies, have allowed us to operate cleaner, less wasteful, and have a mindset of improving our greatest asset, which is the land. The Office of Agriculture has provided best management practice data for the climate change report that demonstrates BMP implementation and corresponding amount of CO2 sequestered. I would like to thank the county for this opportunity to speak in support of Bill 521, and thank to all the sponsors.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next speaker is Randy Stabler. Mr. Stabler, you have 2 minutes and you may begin when you're ready.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm Randy Stabler, a partner in Pleasant Valley Farm at Brookfield, Maryland. And I'm before you today in support of Bill 5-21. This bill is surely a positive small step to a larger county problem of underfunding of land preservation associated with zoning changes and the intent of these changes that go back as far as 1980. I commend the sponsors and specifically the association of this bill to alternative energy and the solar industry. There needs to be a comprehensive county council briefing on ag land preservation programs and specifically fixing the TDR and BLT private market sector problems associated with them. Today, the estimated value of a TDR is approximately $20,000. The county's Department of Finance shows as a fixed asset on an annual basis to secure some of our bond perspective in the county, a total of about 1,100 TDRs. 1,100 TDRs times $20,000 is $22 million that we could stand back and say contributes right to the county's budget. This could be a future discussion of a comprehensive briefing and whatnot. At this point in time, hardly any of that money is being used back into ag land preservation. Lastly, I've enjoyed the discussion here today and listening to your previous topic. I'd like to assure you all that agriculture is very viable in your county right now. Your food source is safe, countywide, national-wide, and abundant. We'll navigate the logistical questions that arise of it. But I appreciate your time today and would ask for your support of Bill 5-21 and hope to have some future dialogue with you all in a comprehensive briefing as it pertains to ag land preservation and the future of the next generations of farmers here in the county. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stabler. Mr. President, that wraps up the speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you to all of our speakers. This public hearing is now closed. I just need a motion to meet in a proposed closed session to consider acquisition of real property for a public purpose and matters generally related thereto pursuant Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3305B3, and to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3305B7. Topic is Grace Episcopal School. Can I get a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved. Second.
Councilmember Reamer moves. Councilmember Jawando seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Great. We will adjourn for closed session. Thank you all so much.